Before we start, make sure we don't lose you in the dark. Subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment to show you are here. I've worked the edge of town for 6 years. Nights out here are usually quiet. Routine. The most I get are noise complaints or the occasional drunk wandering too far from home. But at 2:43 a.m. last Thursday, dispatch radioed in something different. A weak call barely traceable. Static, a whisper, and one sentence. Please help me. I hear his steps. Then it went dead. No callback, no location data, just a vague GPS ping in the industrial zone. The place hasn't been active in years. I almost ignored it. I almost convinced myself it was a prank. But something in the voice made my stomach twist. I drove out.
The lot was overgrown. Tall grass, rusted fences, a building that looked like it hadn't had power since the 80s. My cruiser headlights hit broken glass and graffiti on brick. I called it in. Got static, no backup, no signal. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, and approached the structure. The air felt wrong. Still, not quiet in a peaceful way, quiet like something was holding its breath. I knocked on the metal door, identified myself, waited. Nothing. Then the latch clicked open from the inside. No one stood there. I called out again. "This is Officer Wren. I'm here to help." I stepped in slowly, dust everywhere. Old machines, paper, the smell of mold and burnt plastic. I heard movement, light shuffling. I turned fast, flashlight sweeping, but saw nothing. Just empty corridors and the weight of something watching. Then I heard the voice again, this time clearer. "Thank you for coming." It wasn't afraid, it was relieved. And I realized as I stood there in the dark that whoever made the call wasn't begging for help. They were waiting for someone who would finally answer. I moved deeper into the building, one hand on my flashlight, the other resting near my holster. My boots echoed against the concrete floor, but something about the sound felt off. Like the walls swallowed certain frequencies and let others bounce back sharper than they should. Each room I passed was covered in peeling paint and old equipment, long abandoned and rusted, but it didn't feel abandoned. The air carried a kind of pressure, like I had stepped underwater and the current was waiting to push me somewhere I didn't want to go. I called out again, louder this time. "If you're in here, call out. I'm here to help." I waited. A few seconds passed, and then I heard footsteps running above me. Light. Bare. They moved fast, like a child running barefoot across metal. I found a staircase at the end of the hall, old metal steps leading up to a mezzanine. Every instinct told me to stop, that I'd be better off calling for backup or just leaving and writing it off. But I couldn't shake the voice I'd heard on the radio. It wasn't scared. It wasn't desperate. It was lonely, like it had waited years to be heard. I climbed the steps slowly, flashlight aimed high, sweeping across the empty platform. I saw movement in the far corner. A figure, maybe 4 feet tall, turned and disappeared behind a large machine. I called out again, told them they weren't in trouble, that I just needed to know they were okay. No answer. As I got closer, I heard whispering, not from one direction, but all around me. Faint words, just out of reach, like my ears were underwater. And then I noticed the wall. It had words carved into it, thousands of them. Names, scratched in with something sharp, some overlapping, some written over and over again. One of them was mine. Full name, badge number, date of birth. I froze. I never told anyone I was coming here. The call had been rerouted, random, untraceable. I stepped back, heart pounding, and that's when I heard the door behind me close. Not slam, click, clean and precise. I turned, expecting to see someone standing there, but the mezzanine was empty, the stairs gone. Where the staircase had been was just more wall, blank and old like it had never been touched. I spun around, scanning the space again. Then I heard breathing, not mine. Slow, steady, just over my shoulder. I turned fast, flashlight raised, and for a split second I saw her. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, eyes wide, not scared, but calm, too calm. She looked directly at me and said, "You can help, but only if you stay." I didn't answer her right away. I just stood there, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand, watching this girl stare at me like she knew everything about me. Her voice echoed in my head, not loud, not aggressive, but heavy. Like her words were more than sound, like they carried weight. "You can help, but only if you stay." I asked her what that meant, who she was, if she was hurt, but she didn't respond.
Instead, she turned and walked straight through a narrow gap between two machines that looked far too tight for her to fit through. I followed instinctively, slipping sideways through the space and emerging into another corridor I hadn't seen before. The air here felt colder but cleaner. The walls were lined with more of the same carved writing, names, dates. Some were recent, some were from decades ago. A few I recognized. One belonged to a missing officer from another district, a guy who disappeared in 1999. No body, no explanation, just gone. I saw his full name carved clearly, twice. As I moved forward, the hallway began to shift. The industrial feel gave way to drywall and tile. I stepped through a doorway and found myself inside a hallway that looked like my high school. Lockers on the walls, scuffed floors, fluorescent lights buzzing above. I called out, but my voice sounded strange here, muffled and distant like it wasn't part of the environment. I walked slowly, trying to process what was happening, wondering if I'd been drugged, hallucinating, losing grip. I tapped my chest camera. Dead. No signal. Radio was still nothing but static. Then I heard footsteps again, this time heavier. Behind me, I spun around, expecting to see the girl or maybe even another officer, but the hallway was empty. Until I blinked. Then it wasn't. A tall man in a dark uniform stood at the far end, too far to see his face. I called out, asked if he was with the department. No response. He turned and walked away, disappearing into a side door. I followed again, this time more cautiously. When I stepped through, I wasn't in a school anymore. I was standing in my old house, the one I grew up in. Same wallpaper, same furniture, even the same smell. My parents' voices came from the kitchen, faint and muffled. I stood frozen. I hadn't lived in that house in over 20 years. It had burned down when I was 17. I called out again, but this time my voice cracked. Something wasn't right. My mind kept telling me this was impossible, but my body believed every second of it. I walked toward the sound and past a mirror hanging on the hallway wall. I glanced at it and stopped cold. My reflection didn't move. It just stared back at me. Same uniform, same face, but the eyes were wrong. Hollow, empty. I took a step forward and the reflection stayed still. Then it smiled. Not wide, not exaggerated, just enough to let me know it wasn't me. Behind me, I heard the girl's voice again. "It wants you to forget." I turned. She was standing in the middle of the living room now. She pointed toward the front door, which was open, light spilling through like real daylight. "That's the way out. But if you leave now, it'll keep calling others, over and over. asked her what I was supposed to do. She didn't answer. She just stood there, waiting. I stood there in that impossible version of my childhood home, frozen between the girl and the door. My hand hovered near the handle, drawn to the light outside, to the promise of reality and safety. But her words kept echoing in my mind. If I left now, someone else would get the call. Someone who might not come back. I looked at her. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't begging. She was waiting to see what kind of person I really was. I let go of the handle and turned back. The house began to change immediately. The walls rippled. The lights flickered out one by one.
The floor beneath me turned cold and soft like wet sand. I asked her what I needed to do. She said, "Follow me, but once we begin, you don't get to stop." She turned and walked through a hallway that hadn't been there a second ago. I followed. We moved through spaces that made no architectural sense, school bathrooms opening into train stations, broken stairwells leading into hospital corridors, and every one of them felt familiar, like memories I didn't remember until I saw them again. Sometimes I'd hear voices, my old training officer barking instructions, my mother calling my name, screams from calls I hadn't thought about in years. The girl never reacted. She just kept walking forward, always a few steps ahead, always silent until I asked a question. I finally asked her what this place was. She stopped and looked back at me. "It's made of what you leave behind." The answer hit me harder than I expected. I thought about every mistake, every moment I doubted myself, every call that didn't go right, every family I couldn't give answers to. This place wasn't built to scare me. It was built to wear me down, to make me want to leave, to make me forget why I came. She started walking again, and I followed, this time more focused. We came to a final door, unmarked, made of black metal that shimmered slightly even in the darkness. She turned to me and said, "You go in alone. It's the only way to stop the loop." I asked her what was inside. She said, "The reason it keeps calling." I took a deep breath, put my hand on the door, and pushed it open. Inside was a small room, square and empty except for a single table in the center. On it sat an old police radio, my radio. It was on, crackling softly. I stepped closer and suddenly it began playing every call I'd ever responded to, all layered over each other, loud and chaotic, full of pain and panic and noise. Then it stopped, and a single voice came through. My voice. "You still have time, but only if you let go." I looked around, unsure what that meant. Let go of what? Fear? Guilt? The past? Then I saw the mirror on the far wall. I walked toward it, and this time my reflection stared back exactly like me. No delay, no smile, just me. But behind the reflection was the girl, standing silently, and for the first time I saw her face clearly. She looked like someone I once tried to save, a girl from a domestic call years ago who didn't make it. I had buried her face deep in my memory, convinced myself there was nothing more I could have done. But here she was, or something like her, watching, waiting.
I said out loud, "I'm not running from this anymore." The room responded by shaking. The mirror cracked down the center. The radio went dead. And then silence. Not emptiness, but stillness. The kind that comes after a storm finally stops. The door behind me opened. The girl was gone. I stepped out of the room and found myself back in the mezzanine where it all started. The broken machinery, the dust, the flickering light, everything looked exactly the same, but now it felt different. Lighter somehow, like the weight pressing on the building had lifted. I checked my radio again, and for the first time in hours I heard static turn into a clear voice. Dispatch was calling my unit. I answered with a shaky voice, giving my badge number and confirming I was on site. They responded with confusion, saying they'd lost my signal for nearly 40 minutes and had just begun preparing a search. I told them I was okay, that the place was secure. I didn't mention the girl. I didn't mention the voices or the shifting walls or the fact that I had just confronted something I couldn't explain. Some things don't go in reports. I made my way back down the stairs. Yes, now they were there again, and stepped out into the cool night air. My cruiser was still there, headlights dim, engine off. The lot looked the same, overgrown and broken, but the silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was just night. I took a moment to breathe. I looked back at the building, expecting to see something watching from the window, but all I saw was my reflection faintly in the glass. This time it didn't move on its own. It just stared back at me like any normal reflection would. I got in my car and drove back to the station in silence. At the precinct, I filed a basic report about a false call, abandoned building, no one inside. I left out everything else, but as I was leaving for the night, something caught my eye. On my desk sat a small envelope with no name, no markings, nothing. I opened it. Inside was a single photo, grainy, black and white, a hallway that looked like the one in the industrial building. In the corner of the photo was the girl. Same face, same eyes, standing next to an officer. His badge number was visible. It wasn't mine, but I recognized it. The missing officer from 1999. The one whose name had been carved into the wall. I stared at the photo for a long time, not sure what it meant. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was proof. Maybe it was a message. Whatever it was, it told me that I hadn't imagined any of it. That building, that call, that girl, none of it was random. I was meant to be there, and I was meant to answer. I put the photo in my locker and didn't tell anyone about it. Over the next few nights, I kept thinking about what she said. You can help, but only if you stay. I had stayed. I had followed, and in doing so, maybe I broke the pattern. Maybe I stopped the next name from being carved into that wall. I didn't feel haunted. I felt responsible, like I owed her something, like I owed that officer from 1999 something, and maybe now the story would end differently. Maybe it already had. A week went by, then 2. The call was never traced. No official record of the audio existed in dispatch. I asked quietly around the station, casually, carefully, but no one seemed to know anything about a strange radio transmission or the building out past the industrial zone. I even checked the property records. According to county files, the structure I entered had been condemned and demolished 10 years ago. Nothing should have been there. But it was. And I had been inside. I kept the photo. Every so often I'd take it out, study the girl's face, the missing officer standing beside her, the faded hallway in the background. I started to wonder if he had made the same choice I did, if he'd stayed too long, if he never came out. But maybe, through me, he finally did. Maybe she finally did. I started sleeping better. The nightmares that used to rattle my nerves, the ones filled with sirens, blood, and all the faces I couldn't save, they faded. I still remembered them, but they stopped chasing me. I started showing up early to my shifts again. I volunteered for the late-night calls. I began listening more carefully to the radio, not just for what was said, but for what wasn't, for the silence between the static. I began to understand something I'd forgotten somewhere along the way, that being a cop wasn't just about stopping crime or writing reports. Sometimes it was about showing up, about bearing witness, about refusing to look away even when no one else believes what you saw. One night just after midnight, I sat parked under a dead streetlight, sipping cold gas station coffee when my radio buzzed. No call, just static, and then faintly a voice. "You did good." I didn't move, didn't speak. I just listened. The voice didn't come again. Static faded, the channel cleared. I let out a long breath, heart pounding not from fear, but from something else, something like closure. Maybe it was real. Maybe it wasn't. But the truth was, I didn't need to know. I'd answered the call. I'd stayed when it mattered. And that meant something. I still patrol the edge of town. Still answer calls that don't make sense. Still see things that aren't always easy to explain. But now, when I hear that soft static just before the line clears, I don't ignore it. I listen. Because somewhere out there, maybe just once more, someone is waiting for help. And I know what happens when no one answers.